On Grand Funk Railroad's 1970 live album, Mark Farner addresses the audience at one point. He says, "Brothers and sisters, there are people out there who look just like you, but they're not. And when they hand you something, don't take it." Now, he was talking about the kind of things you might find at a rock concert in 1970, but he could have been talking about affinity fraud. So what is affinity fraud? Affinity fraud is when someone pretends to be a part of a group in order to perpetrate some kind of scam. It can happen to church groups, it can happen to clubs, professional associations, any kind of social scenario where people get together because they have something in common. And the affinity fraud scammer will use language and symbols that are familiar to those groups in order to seem like one of them. Affinity fraud usually takes the form of some type of fraudulent investment scheme. It could be a pyramid scheme where the victims believe they're going to make money by recruiting others into the pyramid. And of course, eventually the whole thing collapses because you run out of people and only the person at the very top really ever makes any money. It could be a Ponzi scheme in which the victims invest more and more, thinking they're going to get some big payout later. And of course, that payout never comes because what's really happening is the scammer's just keeping their money. The affinity scammer also might try to get power of attorney over their victims. They might try to get added to financial accounts, legitimate investment accounts. They might try to be added to deeds for property or get that property signed over to them outright. There are a variety of methods that an affinity fraud scammer can use. And of course, the main feature of affinity fraud is the scammer pretending to be a part of the group they're trying to infiltrate and using familiar language and familiar symbols to sell their fraudulent investment opportunity. They might say things like, "This is only for people in our group. These other groups, they can't invest in this, only us." They might, depending on the group, say things like, "This is kind of a secret. They don't want you to know about this." For example, an affinity scammer trying to infiltrate a religious group might use scriptural references that are familiar to the people in that group. They might use symbols. If they have a brochure, it might be festooned with symbols from that religion that, trying to build that trust. They might imply or just say outright that this investment opportunity is somehow blessed or it's coming from above. So how do you prevent affinity fraud? First thing is to recognize when someone is using a group identity to try to gain your trust. They're presenting an investment opportunity and they're couching it in that language that's familiar to members of your group. That could be a sign that they might be trying to gain your trust for some other purpose. It also comes down to general investment fraud prevention tips. Don't buy into unlicensed investment products. Don't work with unlicensed brokers. And remember that there are no guarantees in legitimate investing. Any legitimate investment that might give you a really big return later also carries the risk of being worth nothing. So any talk of guaranteed payouts is a huge red flag that someone is trying to sell you an investment product that's really just a scam.